For Kansas State football this year, a lot of things have gone wrong. One of the things is definitely injuries. No doubt about that, especially this deep in the season. But we finally might have some good news at some firepower returning for Avery Johnson and the offense.
You are Locked On Kansas State, your daily podcast on the Kansas State Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, welcome on into Locked On Kansas State, your daily Kansas State Wildcats podcast. I'm your host, Christian Rauh, and thank you so much for making Locked On Kansas State your first listen every single day. Now part of the #1 sports podcast network, the Locked On Podcast Network. Welcome back to my everydayers. Today's episode brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, FanDuel is giving away for new customers $300 in bonus bets if that first $5 bet wins. So check out FanDuel for so much more. We're going to dive into Chris Kleiman's press conference today. We're going to dive into a couple things I saw across the sports media about potential things that could impact the Big 12, and especially with Kansas State when it comes to the transfer portal. And then we're going to kind of give an early look at Utah as we are hitting the middle of the week and kind of talk about their key weapons. We'll have a full breakdown on that later on in the week when we do a crossover with JT Winsel of Locked On Utes. But overall, we're going to really dive into this game. This is a game where, of course, you're going to be the underdog. There's no doubt about that. But that doesn't mean that you could play spoiler. And how cool of a season it would be if maybe, you had a disappointing year. But if you could say, hey, you knocked out one of the Big 12 teams from contention from a college football playoff, well, at least you have something to hang your hat on. And maybe that does happen. I'm not holding my breath, but at least something to talk about here on this episode. Chris Kleiman spoke with the press on Monday, as he always does, as we get ready for game week. And the biggest takeaway I got was injuries. They continue to be issues for this team. And what we kind of already figured out to be when we were talking in the reaction show on Saturday after the ugly win against Oklahoma State, Jayce Brown is going to be out for the rest of the season. So that makes two of the most important players on this roster. And if you want to put the third and Dylan Edwards in the conversation, because heading into the year, he definitely was. So let's do it. Shoot. Three of the most important, with the exception of maybe Avery Johnson, are now no longer going to be playing the rest of the year for Kansas State, with Johnson and Romaine being out, Jayce Brown being out, and of course, Dylan Edwards leaving the team. It's just a lot of down feelings. And if I were to tell you that you were still going to be 500 and a chance for making a bowl game with all those things happening, in hindsight, you might look back and say, okay, maybe this was a decent year. Maybe luck just didn't strike Kansas State. Obviously, there's a lot more to it this year, but that's just exactly how this season has gone. Not really anything going in the right way of Kansas State, but it sounds like there might be a little bit of a light at the end of the tunnel, at least when it comes to the team traveling to Salt Lake City this week to take on the Utes. Jared Bradley sounds like he's going to be returning, the transfer wide receiver who has been injured all season long. Another weapon that was hoping to take off and just really couldn't because he couldn't be healthy this year. Sounds like he's going to be back and ready to go. And obviously that's going to be huge when you are trying to replace Jayce Brown out on the field. He's not going to be able to replace Jayce Brown, the depth, the taxes, big play Jayce. You're not going to get that with his speed, with his dynamic kind of ability. And the fact that now you're losing him and Dylan Edwards no longer being on the squad, your speed is really lacking, with the exception of Avery Johnson, who can't do it all. We've seen that be a true fact this season. He can't do it all. Your speed is really lacking this year and for the rest of the season. The running back room doesn't have that. The rest of the wide receiver room doesn't have that type of speed. So Chris Kleiman's answer to all that is they're going to have to be a little bit more creative, if you will. They're going to have to be less explosive, more efficiency. And he said, without Jayce, Kansas State's going to have to lean into methodical drives, 3 to 4 yard gains, shorter third downs. And all of that sounds nice when you're speaking in coach speak, but not a lot of that stuff has happened even with those players on the field. There's been multiple times where he'd want to get the 3-4 yard gains, but the running game just hasn't worked in your favor this year. The offensive line struggled. The running backs have struggled to make any kind of push and play any type of bully ball. So although that sounds all nice, warm, and fuzzy about, we're going to make that happen, that really hasn't happened this year. So I'd like to see that. And then, of course, talking about shorter third downs, one of the biggest gripes many fans have said on the comments on this show, myself included, is that when you get into a third and long situation, Matt Wells struggles with the play calling. They do many passing plays before the sticks, and you get yourself in situations where you have to punt the football. So again, we've been griping about that because it's happened so often. So of course you want 3 to 4 yard gains, because if you get 4 yards at play, you methodically move down the field. You don't have a fourth down, you just continue to make first downs every 3 plays. And even if you have to do a 4th and short, so be it. Of course, you want to average 4 yards per play. That's great football, but it just hasn't really happened or materialized this year. And those shorter third downs, of course, is something you want to see. We're seeing that even at the professional levels, where successful teams, the big matchup that was this last week on Sundays between the Rams and the Seahawks struggle on 3rd and long, but they're like one of the worst teams in the NFL in 3rd and long, and they're the best team on 3rd and short. So the analytics prove that if you can get to a better, shorter third downs, you can be a more successful team. And I think Kansas State has the ability to do that. Just can they make it work? That'll be the biggest question. What will happen to make sure that happens? Of course, Jared Bradley's going to have to step up, try to get some sort of that, some volume of Jayce Brown into there. Tibbs will also have to step up as well. And I think you have to finally get Lincoln Cure in the action. That's something that just hasn't happened so far this season, with the ability of him potentially heading into the portal. He could leave in the portal in just a few months' time, a few weeks' time, really. And you really wouldn't say, okay, you're going to talk about all the potential you left on the table, because we haven't got to see it yet from Lincoln Cure. And I think it's just waiting to be opened up. I mean, the bottle right now, the cork is just ready to pop for Lincoln Cure. And I'd really like to see that happen over the last 2 games, and potentially a 3rd game if they make it to a bowl game. Remember, they have to go 1-1 the rest of the stretch here. Does it get the win against Utah? Who knows? In my opinion, highly unlikely. I think you can win that game against Colorado to finish your season and then go 6-6 and still make it a bowl game. I did see a report out that because of how the analytics have looked at strength of schedule, the way that Kansas State has lost some of these football games, even at 5-7, they could be considered for a bowl game. But I don't know if Kansas State actually takes that invitation, if that's the case. But I have seen that report gone out somewhere. I don't exactly know who reported that, but I did read that somewhere. So just something to keep in mind. Maybe they have already found themselves in bowl contention. But of course, getting the 6 wins secures you a bowl game, and that's exactly what you need to get to. Creative, back to the basics, That's a couple things that you really need to focus on for Kansas State the rest of the way. You have to kind of treat these next 2 games, potentially 3, as auditions for seeing what kind of players are going to step up, what kind of players are going to buy in and prove that they want to stick around in Manhattan, because it's a lost season where you're at right now. You're not going to Arlington. At the best case scenario, you're going to be 7-5, and you're going to go to a bowl game that was worse than you had last year, which many people criticized, going to the Rape Bowl against Rutgers. So you definitely want to try and find a way to get ahead of the season. And being in this type of situation where you're not firing your head coach, where you are not in consideration for the Big 12 championship or the college football playoffs, you're kind of in that middle, right? The purgatory of college football. You kind of have this good feeling right now in the sense, and I know, stick with me for a minute, where you can kind of focus on the future and kind of make this act like a preseason for the next season. Of course, it has to be focused on having certain conversations with folks, asking if they're going to leave in the portal. Of course, there's a lot of stuff happening behind the scenes with agents and stuff, shipping off and talking about their players. We're seeing that happen in just the Big 12 itself. We'll talk about that in just a minute on this show. But you could truly make this work out the next couple of games of the season, where you audition some of these younger players, you show their belief and confidence in these young players, and show and prove to say, hey, look, this is what we have planned for you. And you're speaking of guys like Lincoln Cure or Logan Bartley, you can say, this is our plan for you. This is how we think we can get you to improve as a better player. And this is how we can make you ultimately an NFL caliber player, something that every Division I football player, especially 5-star prospects, one of the greatest prospects in Kansas State history, like Lincoln Cure, I'm assuming is wanting to get to. So you have to draw that out. And right now that really hasn't been drawn out, at least in the eyes of how it's looked on field performance. Maybe they've had those conversations behind the scenes, but in the eyes of what it looks like on the field, that is nowhere close to being able to show the production of what Lincoln Cure and some of these other players can do. So hopefully, with the fact of Jayce Brown being out the rest of the season, with no Dylan Edwards the rest of the season, you trying to find out what you have in the running back room going back to this basic, efficient type offense where you have to work on 3-4 yard gains. You have to work on your offensive line being better off the line of scrimmage, and then maybe getting your tight ends involved more. All of this could be better signs for the future. That's the optimistic view that I'm going to try to look at it the rest of the way, because it might not look great at the final scoreboard this Saturday against Utah. Based on how they've looked the last couple of weeks, it might get tough. It might get really tough. And we're going to talk about that later on in this show. So that's what Chris Kleiman really got to. The biggest thing I got to there was him talking about the injuries, how he wants to get back to better football, more efficient football. And really, he has no choice because of Jayce Brown being injured. He did also mention the things about, Oklahoma State, saying it felt like a game where they had to win. They were playing not to lose because they knew that coaching staff could be seen in a different light. So the fact that he said that out loud makes me think that there is some sort of internal conversations about maybe job security, which, to be honest, I didn't think that would ever happen in the middle of the season with Gene Taylor and Chris Kleiman. So maybe that's the case. Who knows? Or at least just the rumblings of making sure that something has to happen on the coaching staff, maybe below Chris Kleiman, if something would have happened in that loss against Oklahoma State, a team that has not won a Big 12 game since 2023. If Kansas State would have let that win happen, I think you would have had to make some sort of drastic change just because of you letting that happen after the such high expectations you had this season. Well, expectations is definitely one thing. Kansas State was seen as a Big 12 favorite going into this season, and one who was also seen as a Big 12 favorite, the one who won the whole Big 12 last year, Arizona State, is now facing some controversy itself. And I think this same controversy could be a direct impact of what Kansas State might have to worry about this offseason. I want to talk about that next on this show right here on Locked On Kansas State. But first, this episode of Locked On Kansas State is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in the action than with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you missed the start of a game or want to ride that hot hand, well, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score to next quarter to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into that same game parlay for a shot at bigger payouts. That's my favorite, those SGPs. I love knocking those out. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team's making that late push. And right now, FanDuel's giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when that first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com, sign up, play your game with FanDuel. It's the official sports betting partner of the NBA. It's going to be an interesting game for Kansas State. There's no doubt about that. But I kind of want to shift focus for just a minute because something popped up across social media on Tuesday afternoon, and it was something that I wanted to get into this because I believe this is something that could impact Kansas State this offseason, and something drastically where it could impact the fact where we're talking about changing the entire program for the next few years to come. Arizona State's star quarterback, Sam Leavitt, returning to the program in 2026 is doubtful, according to Pete Nakos of On3 Sports. Now, remember, Sam Leavitt, the quarterback for Arizona State, is injured. He was out for the rest of the year, and he brought himself to the Big 12 championship last year, got them to the college football playoffs last year, was just a play away, maybe 2 plays away from beating Texas to getting the Big 12 a win in the college football playoffs. And then now there's this conversation where Sam Leavitt might not return to the Big 12. The reason I'm bringing this up today is because Arizona State won the Big 12 last year. And yeah, they're not having the greatest season. They still are in contention to make the Big 12 championship. Now, things have to go. There's a couple things that they don't control their own destiny. BYU, Utah, other teams like that are ahead of them. Texas Tech, of course. But they still are in contention. And there's still this conversation that the quarterback, Sam Leavitt, who has very high NFL draft stock, definitely higher draft stock than an Avery Johnson right now, is considering making the move to go somewhere else. That, to me, screams that this could also happen to the star players at Kansas State. And of course, when we're talking Sam Leavitt, Avery Johnson comes to mind, but a player that also comes to mind is Austin Romaine. Now, on Monday, Chris Kleiman said that on the press conference, Chris Kleiman said that he believes that Austin Romaine will come back. He's going to have a formal conversation with him after the season, but he strongly believes that Austin Romaine will return to Kansas State next year. But then you get these type of reports that come out about star quarterbacks on other teams, on a team that just made the college football playoffs, on a team that's not having a season as bad as Kansas State, a team that's in a great situation with Kenny Dillingham, a nice coach who other teams are trying to get instead of potentially half the fan base talking about wanting that coach to be fired, which we are seeing right now with Kansas State fans. They're in a lot better of a situation than Kansas State football. Arizona State is in a much better situation. I don't think you can argue that fact. And now we're hearing this report that Sam Leavitt is thinking about heading off somewhere else, potentially the Big Ten or the SEC, to help raise his draft stock. Why wouldn't a guy like Austin Romaine do the same thing? Why wouldn't a guy like Avery Johnson, when we see Jayce Brown, who's out for the season, and who knows if he returns, right? When we've already seen Dylan Edwards leave the program, when we have seen Chris Kleiman and his staff focus on the retention route last year, after starting 7-1 and then the wheels falling off after the game in Houston last year, and then ultimately just getting to a respectable, a win against Rutgers, a comeback win against Rutgers in the Rate Bowl. And then you say, okay, we're going to run it back and be better. You focus on the retention, you get Dylan back, you get Jayce Brown back. The rumors of Avery Johnson potentially going to Tennessee never actually happened after the whole Nico situation, and Avery Johnson sticks around as well. Does that happen again? When you're a team that could be at best 7-5, which would still be the worst record in the Chris Kleiman era, with the exception of the COVID year? I don't know. I really don't know. And that's something that really what I want to do is just kind of prepare you for the fact that this could get a lot worse. It ultimately could get a lot worse for Kansas State for the near future. Where if Avery Johnson leaves, then you might have a max exodus of offensive star power leaving, with other players leaving. If you decide that if these players don't decide that this team's heading in the right direction, they decide to stay put on the coaching staff, there's only one transfer portal in January, this thing could flip very fast in the next month or two. And while the basketball team is just shifting into Big 12 play, and maybe your focus starts going over and looking towards Jerome Tang, the football team might be crumbling before your eyes. It very well could happen. I'm not trying to give you the doomsday scenario, but I'm also trying to prepare you for what could happen this season. We've seen it happen to many other teams in eyes of prestige-wise, much better than Kansas State. It's happened multiple times over this last couple of seasons in this new NIL transfer portal era. When you have one bad year, it doesn't stop you from some players moving on. And with this new world of NIL and transfer portal, and the fact that you're still trying to figure it out with these contracts for players, and the fact where there's maybe some buyouts or maybe some sort of contracts in there, who knows? Like, who knows what you can legally do and legally can't do right now? We've heard it from Chris Kleiman multiple times. We've heard it from multiple other coaches across the country. It's an absolute chaos. They're just in a terrible situation when it comes to this. Now, I'm all for players getting paid. I'm all for players having the opportunity to do what they wish, but I would like a little bit more structure. And right now there is no structure, at least enough structure when it comes to this stuff. So the reason I brought this up with Sam Leavitt is it makes me curious, and it makes me cautious and concerned that this could also happen to Avery Johnson, Jayce Brown, Austin Romaine, Lincoln Cure, and some of the other big names for Kansas State. And if that does happen, if you think that this season right now is a rough year, and then they don't make changes at the coaching staff when, you are then going back to the bottom, and your recruiting this year is not as great as the year before, currently sitting at only 16 players in the recruiting class for 2026, you might be seeing yourself maybe in those preseason polls where we were predicted to finish first, second, third, be first, second, third from the bottom. I mean, it can happen that fast in a conference with the parity as crazy as it is in the Big 12. I don't know. Maybe this is something that I'm overthinking. Maybe it is. But the fact that I'm seeing this happen across the country everywhere, we're seeing it in the SEC, we're seeing it in the Big 10, we're seeing it in the ACC, which you can make the comparisons to the Big 12 too, it just makes me a little bit concerned. And if Avery Johnson, who, I get it, in-state kid, has talked about how much he loves Kansas State, I don't take away from his commitment to this school, or his fact of how much he wants to be here. I've heard that happen over and over again. But money can change a kid's life. Put yourself in that situation. If take the fandom out of Kansas State. If you were in that shoes as a 20-something-year-old kid and you were offered hundreds of thousands of dollars, or maybe in some case millions of dollars to just go play football, a kid's game, a child's game, somewhere else for just the half of a year, would you do it? I think you would. So you got to put yourself in those shoes as much as you don't want to. When you want to say people need to be committed, people need to actually care and love these schools, money speaks. And I think you'd put yourself in that same situation as well. I don't want to speak for everyone, but I think the majority of people could probably look back and say, yeah, he's right. He's absolutely right. All right, let's flip forward. Let's look back to Utah here, and let's look at some of the key weapons that Utah is probably going to give Kansas State. This team is an offensive weapon. They are explosive, and what Kansas State needs to do to try and slow them down. We'll do that to finish up the show right here on Locked On Kansas State. Welcome back to Locked On Kansas State, your daily Kansas State Wildcats podcast. Appreciate you making this your first listen of the day, bringing you Wildcat coverage like no one else. And maybe no one's going to tell you this because, we're at the end of the season here. We're not a Homer Kansas State podcast. We keep it real on this one. And let me keep it real with you right here. This Utah team, this offense is an absolute wagon. They are really good, especially after their loss to number at the time 15th ranked BYU. This team is insane, absolutely insane. Since that loss, they did lose 24-21 to BYU. It was in Provo. Since then, they've played Colorado, Cincinnati, and Baylor. And remember, Baylor, Kansas State only won by a point. In those 3 games, they outscored their opponents 153-49. 153-49. They outscored those 3 opponents a combined total of more than 100 points. If you want to put that on average, they won each of those games on average 51-16. This offense is insane. And I have a feeling that could happen again this Saturday. I don't know if it happens as bad as it does, but I think it could. I think it ultimately could. Chris Kleiman talked very highly of this Utah team, and they definitely deserve what they deserve here on this one. They have one of the best offensive lines in the Big 12. You could even probably put it out in the country. They have tight ends that play like extra tackles, he's mentioned. They run the football with will. They are the second best running game in the country. Move over service academies, ones that usually lead the country in that ranking. No, Utah, the second best in the country. And when you're looking at Kansas State, they're in the middle of the tier, towards the second half of the middle of the tier, 77th in the country in stopping the run. That is going to be the ultimate key because they don't throw the ball a lot. When they do, they're pretty accurate. They're not terrible at it, but they run the football better than almost everybody in the country. Second best in the country in running the football in yards per game. Absolutely insane. And when I mean how much running per game, I had it listed right here. Give me a second here. 278 yards per game, Utah's offense rushes the ball. Now, they're only 96 in the pass. They average just under 200 yards. But overall in total offense, mainly because of that rushing, they're the 10th best offense in the entire country at 477 yards per game. And in scoring, they're 6th in 41.1 points per game. And they really didn't get started in the scoring until that second half of the season. I bet if you put those last 3 games, when we're talking about them winning by an average of 51-16, if you just only use those last 3 games, I bet it's a little higher than 6th best in scoring offense. They might be the best scoring offense over the last 3 weeks in college football. I don't have that stat in front of me, but I would argue that they probably are. They're up there. If they're not 1, they're probably 2. And it's all about their running game. It's all about their quarterback and Devin Dampier, who, when we talked about the Big 12 this offseason, we talked about how great these quarterbacks across the conference were. We hardly brought his name up, if ever. I mean, he has definitely completely shocked the system. He has looked so good this year, mostly on the rushing attack, but man, is he fun to watch. And it's not just him. They also have like a second quarterback that does great things as well. He's a freshman. They just have a lot of good running games. And Kansas State is going to find a way to slow down the running game if they want to even remotely stay in this one. We talk about how Kansas State only lost to Baylor by a point. It was a game Kansas State should have won. Got it. We've had that conversation in the past. Last week, Utah took down Baylor 55-28. 55 points they put up on the Baylor Bears. Kansas State hasn't sniffed anywhere near the 50s. So definitely something to keep in mind that if Utah's going to score this much points with all the weapons that Kansas State has out, this could easily be a game that slips away in front of your eyes very quickly. Could this get as bad as the Texas Tech game? I don't know. I'm not sure. But I think Utah's offense is better than Texas Tech's. Now, overall as a team, Texas Tech is much better. Their defense is elite. Their defense is outstanding. But if I had to go and rank the best offenses in the Big 12, I think Utah's number one. And I think you're about to be playing the best offense in the Big 12 on Saturday. It's going to be a crazy game. I've seen some people say they think that Kansas State's going to lose by 30. That wouldn't shock me, but I don't think it's going to be that bad. I'll give you my final score prediction on Friday. I don't think Kansas State wins this game. I'll give you a little sneak peek into that one, and I'll explain why later on in the week. And this is main one right here. Can you stop the run? The run's going to be very tough to stop in this one for Utah. And of course, they're currently ranked 13th in the country. And we're going to get the college ball playoff rankings that are coming out in just a few hours. When you're listening to this, they might already be out. And maybe they're just a little bit lower. Maybe they're right at 13 still, but they're still battling their way into a potential spot into the college football playoffs. They're trying to get themselves to Arlington. They're still at that 2-loss window in the Big 12. This was the game right here. If you would have beat Texas Tech, this was the game right here where you would have had to focus on against Utah. And then you would have been in this situation, even with your crazy first rough start to the year with those 2 losses in the Big 12 play. That's why that loss at Texas Tech hurt so much. But of course, they're just a much better team than what Kansas State is this year. I think Utah is too. It's going to be a really tough game for Kansas State, but it all starts with them stopping the run. And if they can stop the run, even slow it down and make them force the pass a little bit more, then maybe the Kansas State defensive turnovers can start to come in and take shape. I think that's the best case of them winning the football game. We'll dive more into keys to victory later on in the week. Let me know what your thoughts are about all of this. The transfer portal issue with Sam Leavitt, Avery Johnson, Austin Romaine, you name it. What do you think about the wide receivers coming back and Jared Bradley? Do you have faith in this offense at all the rest of the way? I want to hear your thoughts in the comment description. And then, am I overrating Utah, or are they a wagon just as much as I think they are? Let me know again in the comments. If you're listening in audio, I thank you. You can always hit me up on Twitter at Christian S. Rauh or Locked On K-State. Always talking football, college football, you name it, everything under the sun over there. All right, please like the video. Please subscribe. We'll see you back here next time right here on Locked On Kansas State.